Chapter 1. The winter had come and gone twice since Harlan Blackwood last uttered more than 3 words strung together. The land around his ranch, 50 acres of Montana territory that had once teemed with shorthorns, lay as quiet as his voice. 7 moons ago, his entire herd had vanished during a night of howling wind and distant thunder. Some said rustlers, others whispered of wolves. Harlan said nothing at all. Dawn broke pink and gold over the eastern ridge, painting long shadows. Across the frost-hardened ground, Harlan stood on his porch, coffee steam rising to meet his breath in the cold morning air. His eyes, the color of riverstones, scanned the empty pastures from beneath the brim of a hat worn thin by years and weather. The silence around him wasn't empty, it was filled with absence. The absence of lowing cattle, of ranch hands' laughter, of purpose. He had sent the last of his men away when the money ran dry. Now there was just the wind, the distant cry of hawks, and the hollow echo of boots on wooden floors. Harlan lifted the mug to cracked lips and paused. There at the edge of his property, where the tall grass met the tree line, something moved. Not cattle, something smaller. He set down his coffee without taking his eyes from the spot and reached for the Winchester leaning against the wall. The figure emerged fully from the trees, human, slight of frame, moving with the careful deliberation of the wounded or the hunted. As it drew nearer, the rising sun revealed a girl, perhaps 16 or 17. Her clothes were a mixture of settler cotton and native buckskin. Around her neck hung a pendant carved bone in the shape of a wolf's head. Her black hair was bound in a single braid, and her dark eyes held Harlan's gaze without wavering. She stopped 30 paces from the house, swaying slightly. Only then did Harlan notice the dried blood on her leggings. "Water," she said. Her voice carried across the distance, clear and unafraid despite her condition. Harlan lowered his rifle but didn't set it aside. 7 months of solitude had taught him caution. Indians didn't often venture this close to settler properties alone, especially not young women. Something was wrong. He nodded once and disappeared inside, returning moments later with a ladle and bucket. He walked halfway to her and set the bucket down, then retreated several steps. The message was clear. Come and drink, but keep your distance. The girl approached warily, her eyes never leaving his face. When she reached the bucket, she drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. Only after her thirst was slaked did she speak again. "They will come for me, men from the white settlement." Her English was good, accented but clear. "They say I stole, I did not." Harlan studied her. The wolf totem gleamed dully in the morning light. His father had warned him about Indians and their ways, their beliefs, wolf spirits and animal magic. But all Harlan saw was a hungry, injured girl far from whoever might protect her. "Sit," he said, the word rough from disuse. He gestured to the porch steps. A surprise flickered across her face at his voice, but she approached cautiously and lowered herself onto the bottom step. Up close, Harlan could see the wound on her leg more clearly, a deep gash, clumsily bound, with a strip of cloth now stiff with dried blood. Without another word, he went inside again. The girl tensed, perhaps expecting him to return with ropes, or worse. Instead, he brought bandages, a bottle of whiskey, and a plate of cold venison. "Eat," he said, setting the plate beside her. Then he knelt, uncorked the whiskey, and looked up at her. Their eyes met, and some unspoken understanding passed between them. She nodded once and braced herself. The whiskey hit the wound and she hissed through clenched teeth, but made no other sound. Harlan worked quickly, cleaning and binding the gash with practiced hands. He had done this countless times for injured cattle and ranch hands alike. "Wolf daughter," she said suddenly as he tied off the bandage. "My name in your tongue would be Wolf daughter." Harlan looked up at her, then at the totem. "Blackwood," he replied. Then, after a long pause, "Harlan Blackwood," she nodded as if confirming something she already knew. The silent rancher, the one whose cattle vanished with the Thunderbird moon. His hand stilled. Few remembered that the night his herd disappeared had come during what the natives called the Thunderbird moon. Fewer still spoke of it to his face. "My people say the wolves called them away," she continued, watching his reaction, not with teeth, but with something older. Harlan stood abruptly, his face hardening. He'd heard enough superstition in the saloons and trading posts. He didn't need it on his porch. "Rest," he said curtly, "then go." Wolf daughter didn't flinch at his tone. She merely reached for the meat and began to eat, her eyes never leaving the horizon where the morning mist was burning away to reveal the vast emptiness of what had once been grazing land. "They will come," she repeated between bites. "Men with hatred in their hearts and lies on their tongues." Harlan followed her gaze to the distant road. The silence between them was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, it simply was, like the space between stars. What he didn't know, what neither of them could know, was how this strange morning would unspool into days that would change everything. How a herd long given up for lost would suddenly return under a hunter's moon. How the girl with the wolf totem would awaken something in the silent rancher that he had buried alongside his words. But that was yet to come. For now, there was only a wounded girl, a man with a ranch of ghosts, and the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly above them both. Chapter 2. They came as Wolf Daughter had promised. just as the afternoon sun began its reluctant descent. 3 riders appearing first as dust-hazed silhouettes against the golden light, then solidifying into men with hard eyes and determined jaws. Harlan saw them from the barn where he'd been mending tack that would likely never cradle a cattle drive again. He set down his awl and leather, wiping calloused hands on worn denim. Wolf Daughter sat in the shadows of the barn's interior, her fingers working deftly on something Harlan couldn't see. She had not spoken since morning, but her presence filled the space like smoke, impossible to ignore, impossible to grasp. At the sound of approaching horses, she went still as a doe catching a hunter's scent. "Stay," Harlan said, the word falling heavy between them. He couldn't have said why he offered this protection to a girl he barely knew, whose people had warred with his kind since first contact. Perhaps it was the emptiness of his land that hungered to be filled with something, even trouble. She nodded once, and then melted deeper into the barn's shadows, clutching her wolf totem. Harlan stepped into the yard, thumbs hooked in his belt, loops in a posture of casual ownership that belied the tension in his shoulders. The 3 riders pulled up 20 paces away, their horses stamping and snorting after the hard ride. The lead man was Sheriff Dawson, not a true lawman by any official appointment, but the nearest thing this territory had. Beside him rode Elijah Porter, a shopkeeper whose narrow face matched his narrow mind. And the third was young James Thornton, whose father owned the largest cattle operation this side of the mountain pass. "Blackwood," Dawson acknowledged with a curt nod. "Strange days when you're the man we're looking for." Harlan said nothing, just met the sheriff's gaze with the steady patience of a man who had learned that most questions answered themselves if given enough silence. "We're tracking a thief," Porter interjected, unwilling to withstand the quiet Indian girl. "Stole 3 silver candlesticks and a brooch right off my counter this morning." "Slippery little savage," Thornton added, scanning the property with poorly disguised eagerness. "Saw her heading this direction. You seen anything?" Harlan's expression remained impassive as stone. "No." Dawson studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Mind if we look around? Won't take but a minute." It wasn't a request. All 4 men knew it. "My land," Harlan said. 2 words that carried the weight of territorial law, frontier justice, and the Winchester that hung within reach inside his door. Dawson dismounted slowly, his boots raising small puffs of dust as they hit the hard-packed earth. "Come now, Harlan. We're not here to make trouble, just doing what needs doing. Like when my herd went missing." The words spilled from Harlan's mouth before he could catch them, surprising even himself with their bitterness. 7 months of stored silence cracked open like a damned dot. The sheriff had the decency to look discomfited. The search for Harlan's cattle had been perfunctory at best, with no ranch hands left to speak for him, and Harlan himself barely stringing 3 words together. The case had quietly disappeared like morning mist. "That was different," Dawson said. "Cattle stray, or wolves get him. Whole herd don't stray at once," Harlan countered. "No wolf pack takes 50 head without leaving blood." Porter shifted impatiently in his saddle. "We ain't here about your damn cows, Blackwood. We're here for the Indian girl." Inside the barn, something creaked, a board settling, perhaps, or a small movement. Thornton's head snapped toward the sound, eyes gleaming with the excitement of the hunt. "What's that then?" he asked, moving his horse forward. Harlan stepped into his path. "Barncat had kittens last week." The lie felt strange on his tongue after so many months of near silence, but it came easily enough. Whatever Wolf Daughter might have done, and Harlan had his doubts about, Porter's silverite didn't warrant the hungry look in young Thornton's eyes. "Might just take a look all the same," Thornton said, starting to dismount. Harlan's hand moved to his belt where a hunting knife hung in a worn leather sheath. Not a threat, not yet, but a reminder said no. Tension pulled the air taut between them. For a long moment, the only sounds were the snorting of horses and the distant cry of a hawk riding thermals above the empty pasture. Dawson broke the silence. "James, mount up." There was just enough authority in his voice to make the young man hesitate, then reluctantly swing back into his saddle. "I know she's here, Blackwood," Porter said, his voice tight with certainty. "Why protect a thieving Indian? Your herd's gone, your men are gone, what's left to lose?" The question hung in the air. What, indeed? Harlan had asked himself the same every morning for 7 months. The answer had always been the same. Nothing. He had nothing left to lose except the land itself, and that was worth less with each passing season of emptiness. Yet something shifted in him as he stood his ground against these men. Perhaps it was the way Wolf Daughter had looked at him that morning, not with pity or contempt, but with a strange recognition, as if she saw something in him that he himself had forgotten was there. "My land," Harlan repeated, voice low and steady as stone. "My business." Dawson studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Have it your way, Blackwood, but if you're harboring a thief, that makes you one too. Think on that." He gathered his reins. "Will be back tomorrow, with more men." The threat lay between them, clear as the lengthening shadows. Harlan gave no response except to hold Dawson's gaze until the sheriff looked away first. The 3 riders turned their horses and rode back toward town, dust rising behind them like the ghosts of Harlan's former life. Only when they had disappeared beyond the ridge did Harlan return to the barn. Wolf-daughter sat cross-legged where he'd left her, weaving something from long grasses she must have gathered earlier. Her dark eyes lifted to his face. "You denied me to them," she said. "Not a question. Did you steal it?" Harlan asked, settling onto a hay bale across from her. Her fingers never paused in their weaving. The silver no, the truth yes. She held his gaze. "I took something more valuable than metal. I took knowledge." "What knowledge?" Her hands stilled then. She set aside her weaving, a small pouch taking shape, and touched the wolf totem at her neck. "I know where your cattle are, Harlan Blackwood, and why they vanished under the Thunderbird moon." Chapter 3. Night fell across the ranch like a blanket being drawn over dying embers. Harlan sat across from Wolf-daughter at his weathered kitchen table, a single oil lamp between them casting long shadows against the walls. Her words about his cattle hung in the air, neither dismissed nor fully believed. Outside, an owl called 3 times, a sound the Blackfoot considered an omen of death, as Wolf-daughter had told him when they'd heard it earlier. "Speak plain," Harlan said finally, his voice rough from disuse. "No riddles." Wolf-daughter's fingers traced the contours of her wolf totem. The firelight caught in her dark eyes, making them gleam like wet stones. "Your cattle were taken by the Thornton men, under cover of the storm." Harlan's knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "James Thornton's father and brothers. For men, they scattered your herd across 3 valleys beyond the North Ridge." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "They left wolf tracks using pelts, dragged behind horses. They fired shots to drive the cattle in the storm." Harlan's mind raced back to that night 7 moons ago. The howling wind, the distant thunder. What he had taken for thunder might have been gunshots lost in the storm's fury. But why would Thomas Thornton, the territory's most successful rancher, risk stealing cattle? "Thorntons have more head than any ranch for 50 miles, he said, thinking aloud. "It was not for the cattle themselves," Wolf-daughter replied. "It was for the land, your land." Understanding dawned slowly, like the first gray light before sunrise. Thomas Thornton had been offering to buy Harlan's property for 3 seasons before the cattle disappeared. Each time Harlan had refused. The land had been his father's, and his father's before him. "How do you know this?" he asked, studying her face for deception. "My people watch, we listen." She paused, weighing her next words. "I was gathering herbs in the high meadows when I saw them moving cattle wearing your brand last moon. They have hidden them well, but not from those who know how to see." Harlan rose from the table and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness that concealed his empty pastures. 7 months of struggling alone, of watching his life's work crumble, of silence born from having nothing left to sigh old because of greed and deception. "Why tell me this?" he asked without turning. "Why risk yourself for a white rancher?" Wolf-daughter was quiet for so long that Harlan thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of something older than herself. "My mother was Crow, my father Blackfoot. I belong fully to neither. I live between worlds." Her words were measured, careful. "The Thorntons burned my mother's village 2 winters ago, claimed it was Blackfoot raiders, used the fear to push both tribes further from these valleys." Harlan turned to face her. Her expression remained composed, but something in her eyes spoke of a pain carved deep as canyons. "So this is vengeance," he said. "Justice," she corrected. "There is a difference." A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. Tomorrow Dawson would return with more men. Tomorrow they would search the property and find Wolf-daughter. Tomorrow, whatever truth she carried would be buried under white men's law. "I can show you," she said, reading his thoughts. "Tonight, where they keep your herd." Harlan studied her. In the flickering lamplight, she looked both younger than her years and somehow ancient. The wolf totem gleamed against her skin. "It's a full day's ride to the North Valleys," he said. "Not the way I know." Her lips curved slightly. "There are paths through these mountains that your maps do not show." Decision settled over Harlan like a familiar coat. After months of emptiness, the prospect of action, of purpose, filled some hollow place inside him. If what Wolf-daughter said was true, he could reclaim what was his. If she lied, he had little left to lose. "We leave at first light," he said. She shook her head. "No, tonight." Now her eyes flicked toward the window. "The men who came today, they will not wait until morning. They will return under darkness, thinking to catch us sleeping." As if summoned by her words, a dog barked in the distance once, twice, then silent. Not Harlan's dog. He'd had none since the last one died 2 winters past. Someone was approaching the property. Harlan moved with sudden purpose. He took down his Winchester from above the mantel, checked its loading, and grabbed a saddlebag from a hook by the door. Into it went ammunition, jerky, a canteen. "There's a mare in the stable," he said, his voice low. "Can you ride?" Wolf-daughter nodded. "Since before I could walk." Harlan extinguished the lamp. In the sudden darkness, he felt rather than saw Wolf-daughter move to his side. Her presence was like heat from a banked fire, subtle but unmistakable. "If you're lying," he said quietly, "about any of this, I am not," she interrupted. Her hand found his arm in the darkness, her touch light but firm. "I swear it on the spirit of the wolf, on the bones of my mother, on the truth that lives between your world and mine. Something, in her voice some note of absolute certainty, silenced his doubts. Harlan nodded, though she couldn't see it in the dark. They slipped out the back door into the cool embrace of the night. Stars scattered across the sky like salt across black velvet. The waning moon provided just enough light to navigate by, but not enough to expose them to distant watchers. As they reached the small stable, a flicker of torchlight appeared on the road leading to the ranch house. Voices carried on the night air, Thornton's voice, and others Harlan didn't recognize. "They come to finish what they started," Wolf-daughter whispered, "to drive you from this land as they have driven my people from theirs." Harlan's jaw tightened as he saddled his stallion with practiced efficiency. 7 months of loss and silence crystallized into a single, burning point of resolve. He would find his cattle. He would reclaim what was his, and those who had stolen from him would learn that his silence had not been weakness, but the calm before a storm. Wolf-daughter mounted, the mare with fluid grace, in the faint moonlight, with her wolf totem catching the silver glow. She seemed to embody something wild and knowing, a bridge between worlds Harlan had never thought to cross. "Follow me," she said, turning her horse toward the western ridge, "and trust what I show you." Chapter 4. They rode through darkness like spirits, Wolf-daughter leading along narrow trails that seemed to exist only in her memory. The mare followed the stallion's steps with quiet confidence as they climbed higher into pine-scented shadows. Harlan had lived in this territory for 20 years, yet these paths were foreign to him, ancient ways known only to those who had walked this land for countless generations before. Dawn found them cresting a ridge Harlan had never approached. From this angle, below, nestled between 3 sheltering hills, lay a hidden valley. Morning mist clung to the grass like reluctant ghosts, but even through the haze, Harlan could make out the dark shapes of cattle, dozens of them grazing in the pale light. His cattle. He dismounted slowly, as if in a dream, and moved to the edge of the ridge. Wolf-daughter joined him, her presence solid and real beside him. "Your eyes see true," he said, the closest thing to gratitude his tight throat would allow. She nodded, the wolf totem gleaming dully in the early light. "The Thorntons keep 2 men here. They rotate every 3 days. She pointed to a small cabin nestled against the far hillside. "They will be sleeping now." Harlan studied the valley, counting nearly 40 head, not his entire herd, but most of it. Familiar markings, familiar movements. 7 months of emptiness suddenly filled with possibility. "The other cattle?" he asked. 2 valleys beyond. Wolf-daughter's eyes narrowed against the strengthening light. "But those carry different brands now. These they kept pure, waiting. Waiting. For what? For your land to go to auction. For hunger and despair to drive you away." Her voice carried no judgment, only a weary understanding of how men like the Thorntons operated. "Then they would find your cattle, claim reward, buy your ranch for pennies." Cold anger settled in Harlan's chest. Not the hot rage of youth, but something deeper and more dangerous, the quiet fury of a patient man pushed too far. "How do we bring them home?" he asked. Wolf-daughter's lips curved slightly. "We ask the wolves to help us." Before Harlan could question her meaning, she reached into the small pouch she had woven the day before and withdrew something that gleamed dully in the morning light. A whistle carved from bone, small enough to fit in her palm. She brought it to her lips and blew. No sound came, or none that Harlan could hear, but the cattle in the valley below stirred restlessly, heads lifting as if listening. She blew again, turning slowly to direct the silent call toward the distant hills. Then she lowered the whistle and pointed west. "Watch," she said simply. First, Harlan saw nothing. Then movement caught his eye-gray shapes, low to the ground, emerging from the tree line at the valley's edge. Wolves, 3, then 5, then 7 of them, moving with purposeful grace toward the herd. "They'll scatter the cattle," Harlan said, reaching for his rifle. Wolf-daughter's hand touched his arm, staying him. "No, they hunt, yes, but not today. Today they move the herd for us." As if in demonstration of her words, the wolves began to circle the cattle, not closing in for an attack, but moving with deliberate patterns that pushed the herd toward the eastern end of the valley. The 2 men who had been sleeping in the cabin emerged, shouting and firing warning shots, but the wolves worked with coordinated precision, ignoring the humans entirely. How Harlan began, but stopped himself. Some things defied explanation. "We must ride," Wolf-daughter said, already mounting her mare, "to guide them home." They descended into the valley like avenging spirits, Harlan's stallion thundering ahead as they joined the flow of the moving herd. The Thorntons' men recognized Harlan immediately, confusion and then fear crossing their faces as they realized what was happening. One raised his rifle, but Harlan was faster, firing a warning shot that kicked up dirt at the man's feet. "My cattle," Harlan called out, his voice stronger than it had been in 7 months. "My brand." The men exchanged glances, then fled toward the hills, abandoning their post rather than face the consequences of their employer's deception. The cattle remembered the way home, with Harlan and Wolf-daughter guiding them and the wolves maintaining distance but keeping stragglers in line. The herd moved through hidden passes and across familiar trails. By midday, they had crossed back onto Blackwood land. By afternoon, Dust rose from 40 sets of hooves as they descended toward the ranch house and the empty pastures that had waited 7 moons to be filled again. As they approached the final ridge overlooking the ranch, Harlan pulled up short. Below, in his yard, stood Sheriff Dawson Porter, young Thornton, and 4 other men. They had returned as promised, and now stood watching in disbelief as the missing cattle appeared on the horizon. "There will be a reckoning," Harlan said quietly. Wolf-Daughter's eyes were on the wolf pack that had followed at a distance. As they reached the boundary of Blackwood land, the wolves paused, watching the largest of them, a silver-gray male, with eyes that seemed to hold Harlan's gaze, lifted its head and howled once, a sound that carried across the valley like judgment. Then, silently as they had appeared, the wolves melted back into the wilderness. "There are many kinds of justice," Wolf-Daughter said, touching her totem. "Some belong to men's laws, others to older ways." The cattle flowed down the hillside toward home, toward water and pasture and the corrals that had stood empty too long. Harlan and Wolf-Daughter rode behind them, side by side, as the sun began its slow descent toward evening. Below, Dawson and his men watched in stunned silence as the miracle unfolded before them: the silent rancher, the Indian girl with the wolf totem, and the herd returning after 7 moons missing. The truth would come out now. The Thorntons would face their reckoning. The land would remain Blackwood land. And perhaps, in the quiet evenings to come, Harlan might find words again, words for grief and justice, for gratitude and possibility, for the strange bridge between worlds that Wolf-Daughter had shown him existed as they rode the final distance. "Home." Wolf-Daughter glanced at him. "The wolves, remember," she said softly, "and now, so do you." Harlan nodded, understanding at last why he had fed a girl with a wolf totem, and how that simple act of kindness had brought his world back to life.